The sky turned a very dark grey. It was almost like night, but it was still daytime. Big, heavy clouds gathered overhead, looking quite cross. Then the rain began to fall. At first it was just a few drops, pitter-patter, but soon it was a real downpour, a proper soaking rain. The wind started to blow too. It whistled through the tall grasses and shook the leaves on the trees. It was the kind of storm that made sensible creatures hurry to their homes. Pipkin was a very tiny rabbit with soft brown fur and a twitchy nose. He lived in a cozy burrow dug deep under the roots of an old oak tree. His burrow was usually dry and warm, a safe place to be. He had soft moss for a bed and a little store of sweet clover. When the storm began, Pipkin was nibbling on a tasty dandelion leaf. He heard the wind and the rain, and he peeked out of his burrow entrance with wide, curious eyes. The rain came down harder and harder. It hammered on the roof of Pipkin's burrow. The wind howled like a hungry wolf, making the old oak tree groan. Pipkin felt a little shiver, not just from the cold, but from a tiny bit of fear. He hoped his burrow would stay dry. He had never heard such a loud storm before. It sounded as if the whole world was having a very noisy bath. He missed the sunshine already. Suddenly, a little trickle of water appeared at the entrance of his burrow, then another and another. The ground outside was becoming very wet. The little trickles turned into a small stream flowing right towards his cozy home. Pipkin watched with growing worry. His safe, dry burrow was not safe anymore. The water was rising. He knew he could not stay. He had to be brave and go out into the storm. Pipkin hopped out of his burrow right into the fierce storm. The rain stung his eyes, and the wind pushed him this way and that. The ground was muddy and slippery. Water was everywhere, swirling around his little paws. Oh, how he wished he was back in his dry bed of moss. But there was no going back now. The water from the nearby stream was rising very fast. It had become a rushing, angry river, much bigger than before. Before he knew it, a strong current of water swept Pipkin off his feet. He was so small and the water was so strong. He tumbled and turned, quite out of breath. He tried to paddle with his little paws, but the water was too powerful. He was carried away from his home, further and further into the swirling flood. He saw big branches and leaves rushing past him. It was a very frightening experience for such a little rabbit. Everything was a blur of brown water and grey sky. Pipkin felt very alone and very scared. He was tossed about like a little leaf in the wind. He managed to scramble onto a piece of floating wood, a small branch that had broken off a tree. It was not very big and it wobbled precariously, but it was better than being in the cold water. He clung on tightly with his tiny claws, his heart thumping like a drum against his ribs. The world looked so different from his wobbly raft. He could not see his burrow or the old oak tree. He only saw water, endless water, and the driving rain. He was a tiny speck in a very big, very wet world. He shivered from the cold and the fear. Where was he going? Would the storm ever stop? He missed the smell of clover and the warmth of the sun. He felt very, very small. Even though Pipkin was terribly frightened, a little spark of hope flickered inside him. He remembered his mother telling him stories of brave rabbits who faced dangers. He did not want to give up. He had to keep trying. He paddled with his back paws a little, trying to steer his wooden raft just a tiny bit. He looked around, his nose twitching, searching for any sign of land, any sign of safety in the grey, watery world. The storm raged on, but Pipkin held on tight. He saw a big, dark shape looming in the water. It was a large, tangled mass of roots and branches. For a moment his heart sank, thinking it was another danger. But then he saw that some of it was sticking out of the water. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could reach it. It looked a little steadier than his wobbly piece of wood. It was a tiny chance, but it was something. With a new burst of energy, Pipkin paddled harder. His tiny legs ached, and he was so tired. But the thought of something solid beneath his feet kept him going. He aimed for the tangled roots. He had to be careful not to get caught in the rushing water between. He took a deep breath, or as deep as a tiny wet rabbit could. He was a brave little rabbit, braver than he knew. He would not let the storm win. He told himself that the rain would stop eventually. He remembered the warm sunshine and the green fields. He thought of his cozy burrow, and the hope of returning or finding a new safe place kept his spirits up. Even in the middle of the scary storm with water all around, Pipkin held on to that warm feeling of hope. It was like a tiny bright light inside him, showing him the way through the darkness and the rain. After what felt like a very long time, Pipkin's little wooden raft bumped gently against something. It was the edge of the tangled roots. With a last big effort, he scrambled off the wood and onto the muddy but more stable mass. He was out of the main current. He shook his wet fur, sending tiny droplets flying. He was still very wet and cold, but he was no longer being tossed about by the angry water. He had found a little island of safety. Slowly, the rain began to soften. The loud rumbles of thunder grew fainter and moved further away. The wind did not howl so fiercely anymore. Pipkin found a slightly sheltered spot among the roots, a little nook that was a bit drier. He curled up, tucking his nose under his paws, and shivered. He was exhausted, but he was safe for now. He closed his eyes and rested, listening to the storm slowly calming down. When Pipkin next opened his eyes, something was different. A pale, watery light was filtering through the clouds. The rain had stopped completely. He peeked out from his hiding place. The water levels were still high, but they were no longer rushing so wildly. And then a beautiful thing happened. A little patch of blue sky appeared, and then another. A weak but warm ray of sunshine touched his fur. It felt wonderful. The world looked fresh and clean after the storm. Pipkin took a deep breath of the damp air. He was a very tired, very muddy, but very brave little rabbit. He had faced the big storm, and he had not given up. He had found his way through the scary water with hope in his heart. As the sun grew stronger, Pipkin knew that new adventures and perhaps a new, cozy burrow were waiting for him. The storm was over.